Hello, everybody. Welcome back. You're listening to Unlearn with Bianca, a podcast where we talk about all things self-healing, health, personal growth, the mind-body connection, relationships, and more. Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Today, I'm going to be giving you guys a brain hack, and you're going to learn the power of your words and your language, what you speak internally to yourself and externally in conversations, and how when we shift our words, when we shift what we are speaking, it can completely transform everything. So we're going to get into that. But first, I just want to remind you that next Tuesday, the 28th of January, 7 p.m. New Zealand Standard Time, I am going to be running a free women's nervous system workshop. I will drop the direct link in the show notes so you can just click through. It takes about a minute to register. I would love for you to join me live if you can make it. It's such a special experience when everyone's together. But if you can't make it, don't stress. I'll be sending out the replay to anyone who registers for this workshop. And remember, it's free. Okay, so back to our topic today, the power of language, the power of our words. Now, for some background context, I first learned about the power of our words when I started retraining my brain a decade ago. And I remember it being such a huge aha moment because up until this point, I had never really considered the language that came out of my mouth. I'd never really considered the words I use, the way I structure sentences. In fact, I hadn't actually considered the fact that I had power over challenging and shifting my thoughts at all. But what I really discovered, and I discovered this pretty quickly because my pain started to lower, and that's the main reason why I went into brain retraining in the first place, is that language shapes reality. And to go even deeper in terms of the neuroscience, the words that we use and the association we have created with words can actually trigger neurology that can impact our physiology. So negative words or phrases activate the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and this releases stress hormones like cortisol. It can trigger a fight or flight response, and it can get us into a negative loop cycle. So the brain is constantly processing information, and we underestimate that language is a powerful tool that shapes how we think, how we feel, and how we act. And from a neurological standpoint, the language isn't just about communication, it's directly tied to the way that our brain organizes and interprets the world. So we're going to delve into this today, and I'm going to really share with you where you might be limiting yourself with your language without even realizing, and more importantly, how you can start to shift this and feel more empowered simply by changing the words that you use. And remember, this is internal and external. And what I mean by internal, external is that you might be thinking, I'm not the type of person to complain out loud. I'm not the type of person to go into the negative out loud or to limit myself in conversations. But we all have this running internal self-dialogue, whether we're aware of it or not. So a lot of this limiting language is actually in our own internal minds. You know, it's not stuff we speak out loud. So as I'm going through this episode, I want you to keep that in mind as well. So as I go through my list today, all I want you to do is start thinking about what points apply to you. Where does this language come up day to day for you? Is it in a particular instance? Is it with a particular person? Is it a particular time of the day? And if you feel like you don't know where to start, ask somebody that you live with, ask a friend or a family member, hey, I'd love some feedback on where you notice I limit myself with my language. And from a kind place, hopefully, they will be able to give you some context as well that you can start working with. Because the truth is that we all habitually limit ourselves through our language from time to time, but the more we can be aware of it, the more room there is for change. And remember that change happens through consistency. So it's just about small, consistent changes. I also want to quickly say that if you're a client listening, there'll be some nice reminders in this episode. I'm not going to share the specific language that I will have taught you with the lightning process, but a lot of these same principles apply in this episode. Okay, so let's get into it. The first thing I want you to be aware of when it comes to the power of your words and your language is labels. Labels or identity statements, because labels become a part of our identity. As humans, we love to make sense of things. We love labels because it helps categorize things. It helps put something in a box, right? But what happens when we carry a label over time is it becomes our identity. And in terms of empowerment, we can really limit ourselves by the things we say to ourselves that imply that something is part of us at an identity level. Because when we speak words at an identity level, there is no room for change. Zero room for change. And I'll give you some examples in a second. So, identity statements or labels often start with I am or I have. So, as you can already start to hear, they're very strong statements. These labels we can learn from authoritative figures in our life. And by authoritative, I mean people that are important in our life, but also people that we assume have more answers than ourselves. And if that label sticks, then our brain starts to look for evidence to support this label or this identity through our reticular activating system. And over time, we begin to see the world and ourselves through a very particular lens. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where the language that we use limits our ability to see beyond the constraints. So I'll give you guys an example. The brain thrives on patterns and repetition. And when we say things consistently like, I am a disorganized person, I am lazy, I am terrible at relationships, notice how they are very strong labels, very much based at the identity level. This is the type of person I am. It is what it is. I was like that when I was younger. I'm going to be like that when I'm older. There's no room for change. And then we have health ones like I have IBS. I'm just an anxious person. You get the point, right? These are strong labels, strong identity statements. And what this language can do, if we repeat it, is it creates a cognitive bias. For example, somebody who identifies as being in chronic pain, they're probably going to say language like, I am somebody who has chronic pain. I have chronic pain. Those sorts of identity statements. They will begin to focus only on the aspects of their experience that confirm the pain, even when there are moments of relief, because their brain is starting to find evidence that supports their identity statement of I am somebody who has pain. So it's going to be a lot harder to shift, a lot harder to notice healing from that place because the language is limiting. And I do want to make it clear, especially when it comes to a diagnosis, that I think diagnoses can actually be really important. They can be really validating. It can help reduce stigma and social isolation. But the issue is when there's no clear path to recovery, those labels, those identity statements, they can make us feel very disempowered. And that is where I think a lot of people get really stuck. So as you can start to hear, I am statements or I have statements, there's no gap. There is no choice point. There is no opportunity to make a new choice. There is no opportunity to see something differently. So how can we change this? We can start to shift our language to feel more empowered, to imply that this situation or this trait is not who you are. It's something you're experiencing, but it won't be there for a lifetime. Okay. So I'll give an example. Someone that says, I am just a disorganized person. Okay. Very blanket statement, no room for change. We would change that to something like, last week I was feeling scattered and this week it's a new week. Notice how much more room there is for change just by shifting out of that label. out of that I am statement. Another one might be, I am just an anxious person, or I have anxiety. How I would shift that to feel more empowering is, I am currently experiencing some anxiety, or I am experiencing some anxiety this week. Notice that I'm not dismissing the symptoms. Notice that I'm not saying anything that's not true. It's just that reframing it in a way that makes it feel like it's not permanent has a lot more agency in the sentence. So you're shifting the language you use to train your brain to seek evidence of growth and possibility and change, rather than staying stuck in a really fixed narrative. It's a temporary experience. It's not who you are. This is the particular one I want you to focus on out of this whole episode. I honestly feel like identity statements are the ones that really can keep us the most stuck. So any limiting labels, I am statements, I have statements, I want you to write this down. Really take time to think about, is this serving me? And if it's not serving you, if it's making you feel stuck and disempowered, I want you to reframe it in a different way by writing down another way of saying it. That's just going to open up a whole lot of windows of opportunities that you once did not see. The next thing that we want to be mindful of is using sweeping language, like really generalizing sweeping words and language. For example, I always, I never, every single time. Okay, notice that in those words, it's like a blanket statement. And this changes, when we use this language, it changes the way that the story is told and stored in our mind. It might be like when you say, it just never goes right. Again, it's like a blanket statement. They never listen to me. I always have anxiety. I have these symptoms 24/7. Okay. Blanket statements, big sweeping statements. Every single winter, I feel depressed. So notice there's, again, no room for change. So our brains have a negativity bias. I've spoken on this one before, and it has this tendency to focus on and remember negative experiences more than positive ones. So these sweeping words, there's the sweeping language, it really amplifies this by locking us into this binary thinking. And it creates stronger neural connections in the brain, making those stories and those beliefs feel more true. So what we want to do to change this is avoid sweeping statements and absolutes, we call them. Instead of saying, I always mess things up, you could reframe it to something like, I made a mistake this time, but, and I've also gotten things right before in this area. This opens up more space for self-compassion and balanced thinking. You can also replace those never and always words with phrases like sometimes, or at times I do this, at times I feel like this, or often. So just notice that they're not black or white. There's somewhere in the middle that gives more agency for change. If something happens at work and you're like, oh, that was so shit, it never works for me, what you could say instead is, okay, right now it hasn't gone to plan. I'm learning as I go. Notice that I was a lot more specific. So notice how one statement creates tension, which was the first one, and the other one drives more calmness and ease and openness. And this is what we are looking for. So if you're somebody who tends to have these big sweeping words, again, all I want you to do is start to notice where they're showing up. Pause and reflect when you catch yourself using this sweeping language, and just ask yourself these questions. Is this true? Is this always true? Can I think of even one exception? And I'll give you a really quick example of this. Actually, in my head, I used to say a lot, I have pain 24/7 when I was experiencing chronic pain. And to be honest, I did have pain daily. But I remember my practitioner said to me, do you have pain when you're asleep? And I was like, well, not when I'm asleep. And then it clicked on me. I did not have pain 24/7. Yes, I had it daily. That was accurate. But by saying 24/7, a big sweeping statement, that actually wasn't true. So the more we can actually extract, oh yeah, there's an exception there. That's not necessarily true. The practice of doing this, it can really help break that automatic cycle and challenge this absolute thinking. Okay, number 3, we are going to focus on eliminating I should and I have to, especially the I shoulds. Okay, eliminating the word should from your vocabulary in the right instances will create more certainty, more self-compassion, lessen perfectionism, and lessen guilt. Okay, so let's give an example. When we say things like, I should be doing this, or I should have done that, often it implies self-judgment and it really drives pressure of not meeting expectations. Instead of I should be doing that, what about an alternative like I choose to do this, I want to do this? For example, instead of I should exercise, you can instead say I want to prioritize my health by moving my body, or I choose to prioritize my health by moving my body. So notice the difference. I think another thing about should is it keeps us focused on what we think others expect instead of tuning into what we genuinely want. And it also limits our self-compassion, because if we say things like I should have done more, it just keeps us focused on the past. So a way to actually reframe that would be like, I did the best with what I had at the time and that was enough. Yeah, it keeps us locked into, I would say, guilt and perfectionism. And if we can begin to notice where we use the shoulds and change that, we can open up to a lot more self-compassion and cultivate a far more empowering mindset. The next one on my list is the word try. Now, this is one that I personally keep an eye on myself. You either do something or you don't. Try is a word we need to remove because it's coming from a place of doubt and hesitation, and it's on the passive side. When you say the word try, you continually begin to undermine your own confidence. So removing try from your language, it can help you build clarity, confidence, and commitment to doing what you say you are going to do. It's small, but it's a really impactful change because it really reinforces your belief in yourself. For example, I'll try to figure it out. We would change that to, when I have space this week, I will take the next step to figuring it out. Notice how much more decisive and confident I sound when I say that second sentence, because that try word, it creates uncertainty and it actually activates the regions in our brain associated with doubt. Whereas when we say I will, it's activating the reward system. So just a small shift in language can completely fire up different neurology. So as I said, you can replace the word try with I will. Rather than I'll try to eat healthier, it's like I will eat healthier, or I will choose to eat healthier today. So you can add the word choose. Or you can replace try with practice, which allows for more growth as well. For example, rather than I'll try and set boundaries around my mum, you can say I'm practicing setting boundaries around my mum. Notice the difference. One's uncertain and the other one, there's more certainty. Okay. Eliminating that word from our vocab for now, see how it feels. The next one I want you to be aware of is using but in the middle of a sentence. So I'll give you guys an example. It would be, I'm looking forward to it, but I'm nervous. Okay, notice that. That sounds pretty typical. Would say that. Changing that to, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm a bit nervous. So for me, changing the but to and, it does one thing in particular. And what it does is it validates that two things can be true at once. That we can be both looking forward to something and excited about something, but also that there's parts that can feel scary, rather than negating one and keeping the other, which is often what happens when we use but, because with but, it's black and white thinking. And if you really think about it, if you use but in the middle of a sentence, it dismisses and diminishes the positive statement that came before it. And an example of this would be like, I made progress today, but I didn't finish everything. So notice you're saying one thing, you're like, I made progress, but I didn't finish. And you're going into lack of compassion and then thinking about what you haven't done. Versus, I made progress today and I still have some more to do. So notice how much more balanced that is. Two things can be true at once, and the word and, it just allows for so much more self-compassion. Even when we're speaking in communication, like if you're saying something like, I hear what you're saying, but I see it differently, it feels quite, it feels like you're working against someone. Whereas if you say, I hear what you're saying and I see it differently, then you're not dismissing the other person's point of view. So this has been one that I've really been practicing in the last year. I actually heard it on a podcast. It's not one that I had to actually considered before, but I heard it on a podcast about a year ago, and it's actually really changed the way I think about a lot of things. Okay, guys, we're getting through the list. It's a big old list today. The next language we are going to practice eliminating is she made me feel, or he made me feel. Anytime there is made me, we feel powerless to somebody else's actions. We can feel a certain way, we're allowed to feel a certain emotion, but when we say made me, it's like they are the conductor of our emotions. So changing it from she made me feel angry to she did this thing and I felt angry is completely different. One implies that she had control, the other is she was being her and I felt a particular way about it. So this just helps separate what is their stuff, what is their actions versus what is our response and reaction. When we can really own our own responses and reactions and distinguish them between somebody else's behavior, we are engaging our prefrontal cortex, and this promotes more self-regulation and a sense of influence and control. And this is really important because this shift really reinforces our personal responsibility and our emotional ownership. So just by eliminating they made me feel this way or they made me pissed off, shifting that to they did this and I felt this, it's really going to help you feel more empowered. So we've talked a lot about the way we structure our sentences and what words to keep an eye on, but the final thing I want to talk to you about is your actual choice in words, because the brain responds better to what we want more of rather than what we don't want. So the choice in words that we use is also really, really important, and it's not something that a lot of people tend to consider much. So let me think. For example, describing an experience as exciting versus terrifying, even though the physiology is very similar, it can engage an entirely different brain circuit and emotional state. I do a lot of this work with my lightning process clients because when clients come in, they've often had a really negative experience, and there's particular words that they are using in their self-talk or out loud every single day. So it could be pain, it could be anxiety, it could be fatigue, it could be struggle. And words with really strong emotional or negative or fearful connotations, like these ones, are more likely to activate the amygdala, the brain center for threat detection and emotional processing. And this can trigger a fight or flight response, which heightens the stress and physical tension and gets people stuck in more of a perpetual fear response and loop. Okay, so I actually teach my clients ways to shift the way their brain is perceiving something. So, for example, the word pain, for anyone that's had chronic pain, there will be a big fear response around that. So, when they change their language to a word like discomfort, when the brain hears discomfort, first of all, it's a bit different. It's not the P word. But second of all, the word comfort is within discomfort. So the brain is more likely to activate pathways for comfort, and it reduces the perception of a threat leading to less amygdala activation and a calmer response. For anxiety, a word that would do something similar might be unease or nerves. So notice that what I'm implying in terms of the symptom is similar, but the word can completely shift the threat response. And an interesting fact is negative language actually increases the cortisol levels and activates the stress-related areas of the brain, but positive, or keyword here, neutral language reduces stress hormones and increases the calming neurotransmitters like serotonin. This shift impacts regions like the hippocampus and the hypothalamus. I'm going into some neuroscience, nerdy neuroscience here, but what I'm really getting at is the importance of using language for what we want more of, or using neutral language. Even if we think of one day to day rather than chronic illness specifically, if we use the word exhausted, I'm so exhausted, this can trigger feelings of overwhelm, right? Whereas if we reframe that to I need more rest, which is actually what you want more of, it signals a solution and it engages the prefrontal cortex to take constructive action. So this is so important. If there are particular words that you've noticed that you say frequently, like I struggle with this, I'm in pain, I'm exhausted, I want you to write those words down and then think of a word that doesn't feel like it has such a huge response and start with that. I've given you guys a lot to think about in this episode, so if you need any clarification, you're more than welcome to get in touch with me. The main thing I really want you to consider after this episode is just becoming more aware of the words you speak, because one thing that always stuck with me is if you knew the body was responding based on the words you use, if you knew your reality was shifting based on the words you speak, would you be speaking half the things you say? And again, guys, you know that my quotes aren't exact, but something like that. Once I heard that analogy, I was like, wow, it's really important we become mindful of our language. It is really important that we practice more compassion and we drive the brain towards what we want more of. So I will leave you with that. Maybe if there's enough interest, I could run a workshop on this and really direct you through it bit by bit and look at some of the areas that you're finding that you come against. If you're interested in that, just let me know. And if I get enough people reach out, then I can put that on. So I hope you guys have a fabulous week. And for those of you joining me on my workshop next Tuesday, can't wait to see you guys there. Next week, there is an episode with one of my clients, so that will be a great one to listen to, especially if you're feeling stuck. It will be super inspiring. As always, I love to hear from you. I love to hear what you want to hear more about. And you're welcome to get in touch with me on Instagram or via email. Have a stunning day, and I'll see you guys all next week.